They came to us as gods, and we, like fools, took them at their word. Nephedran, the Deceiver, Azagorod, the Nightbringer, Lash-Udra, the Endless Swarm. I curse their names, and the names of all their malevolent brethren. The rulers of the galaxy are burdened with the survival of their people in an existence forever drenched in blood. Each imbued with power, alike to gods, these terrible monarchs changed the fate of untold billions with each decision made in their name, and hope to hearken a brighter future from a dystopian galaxy. For today, we shall elucidate the clandestine and mysterious sovereign of the Infinite Empire and broker of the curse of biotransference. The silent king of the Necrons, Sarek. Prior to my people's ascendance into forms of living metal, our empire was typified by suffering, death, and decay. The lifespan of the Necrontyr of old, as few as 3 decades in most instances. Despite our toil in escaping the cradle of our birth, the affliction of our accursed sun had sullied the very genetic code of our people. Radiation bombarded our homeworld as generation after generation sought to make vast strides in technological wonders to find a means to extend our lifespans and deny fate its costly toll. Dynasties sprang up to lead each desperate civilization of the Necrontyr with promises of salvation, yet among all hierarchies of my people, one figure loomed large, of a doomed species. Born into the Sarek dynasty, the boy known as Sarek would one day assume the mantle of the Silent King, and address his subjects through his 2 subordinate pharaons, as was the custom for each previous chosen to rule the Triarch Council of the Necrontyr. Inherited by his forebears as a hereditary position, Sarek carried the burden of his predecessors, each characterized by an impermanent and brief existence, before perishing from their radiation-induced affliction. Served in turn by their Triarch Praetorians, each pharaon of the council commanded their subjects to uphold the codes of law of their empire, and forever maintain their desperate quest to one day find reprieve from their dire circumstance. Ensuring that no dynasty shall fall during his reign, the Silent King of each generation swore to uphold the laws of his people, for should they descend into infighting, the doom of the Necrontyr people would be assured. For what greater fuel than egocentricity is there to the flames of desperation? Yet Sarek was not to know that he would be the last of his position, nor that he would rule over his people for millennia. Discovered by the ancient celestial beings known as the Old Ones, the psychically gifted primordial entities looked upon our people with disdain, and despite their immense power, did abandon us to our terminal fate. Enraged at the slight made by beings of such power, Sarek knew in his heart that despite the immense scientific and technological sophistication of our people, they would be no match to humble the Old Ones. Their psychic prowess anathema to our kind, with their underling species adding to their dominion of the stars, there would be no hope for victory against such a union of foes. Yet the deeds and glories of all prior inheritors of his title would be overshadowed by eons of toil made by the quintessential king, due to the intervention of mysterious and terrible entities. Much of the C'tan's involvement in the destiny of the Necrontyr has been twisted, and many source false accounts of their arrival to the galactic stage of conquest. Archives within the Solemnis galleries claim their first encounter to be mere chance. The Book of Mournful Night within the Eldari Black Library states that their hatred of the Old Ones drew the Necrontyr to them, alike to a moth to the flame. All that can be discerned in truth is that the people of the Necrontyr would be divided as the star gods cast their shadow across the dynasties of old. Some allied with their new patrons, whilst others sought to contain their essence within shells of necrodermis. Yet not long after these initial encounters between our two species was an accord struck. Sarek the Silent King and ruler of the Necrontyr spoke with the being known as Mephedran, bargaining an exchange of resources. The Catan would aid the Necrontyr in destroying the Old Ones and their ilk in exchange for necrodermis bodies to substantiate their intangible forms. Mephedran, known to its kin as the Deceiver, would prove to be a felicitous bearer of such a title and lead the Necrontyr down the path to damnation. Aware of his associate's true nature, Sarek would, despite his misgivings, willingly surrender his people to ensure the survival of the dynasties, after months of debate within his royal court. Warned by the court astrologer, Oricon the Diviner, that such a compact would doom the Necrontyr, his dissenting voice would be silenced, delivering the Necrontyr from their terrible and unjust fate. My people traded the chains of fatalism for the shackles of eternal subjugation. Immortality was our price, and the Catan paid it willingly. Yet as the biofurnaces loomed over the vast people of the Necrontyr, they marched and were carried into their roaring hearts. Throngs of the sickly died as they spent their last ebbs of strength approaching the gateways to the furnaces, as those too frail were carried through the devices on medical biers. Re-emerging from their biotransference as skeletal forms clad in living metal, the Necrontyr had been reborn. The majority now thralls to the whims of their dynasty's respective nobles, Sarek had traded the soul of his people for mechanical permanence. The Catan swarmed around the biofurnaces, drinking deep the torrents of life energy, spewing from their summits. Sarek watched on, now clad in living metal of immense strength, yet felt utterly powerless, as his people's very being was consumed by the Star Gods. Realizing far too late the mistake he had made, the Silent King now reigned supreme over the empty husk of his civilization. The Necrontyr were no more. Now they would be known only as the Necrons. Beholden to his compact with the Star Gods, true to his word, the Silent King led his newly reborn armies of automatons and demagogues into battle. Feeling no pain, enduring no frailty, nor burdened with the cost of mortality, the Necrons lay waste to the mortals commanded by the Old Ones. Faster, more precise, and deadlier than they had ever been, the Necrons annihilated every opponent in their way, as the most catastrophic war in the existence of the universe claimed untold billions of lives, and ruined innumerable planets in their wake. The Catans commit genocide across the stars, supported by their obedient thralls, as the Old Ones fell, one by one. The Silent King's people ingrained with command codes prevented their betrayal of their indomitable ruler, for Sarek's despair for his people's betrayal was regardless undercut by a unanimity never before displayed by the Necrontyr. Considering to sever the command protocols on occasion, Sarek knew in his phantom heart that no matter his justification, were his people to retain even a fragment of autonomy, they would surely seek vengeance against their king. As entire solar systems expired and were devoured by the Star Gods, Sarek began to plot their containment after the inevitable defeat of the Old Ones and their puppets. Biding his time until the opportune moment to strike, Sarek's patience would be rewarded, as with the conclusion of the war in heaven, the Catan grew restless. Not content with the purge of their ancient foes, the Star Gods turned on each other as their hunger for power required sating. Leading a revolt against the Catan, the Silent King ordered his people to construct vast hypercannons capable of injuring the Star Gods. Firing these god-killing superweapons at their patrons, so terrible was their might that causality itself was damaged in the process. Fragmenting the Catan into shards of their former might, the Necrons contained the nigh unkillable beings into prisons befitting their immense power. Imprisoning the smaller shards within Tesseract labyrinths, those too mighty to contain, were interred inside vast tesseract vaults. The Necrons now stood as the true inheritors of the galaxy, every one of their foes slain, imprisoned, or diminished beyond all hope of reprisal. Victory's cost had been high, and many had fallen, including the Triarchs of the Royal Court. Sarek was truly alone, save for the squabbling lords beneath him, the monarch of a phantom empire. Yet whilst freedom was a worthwhile endeavor, the Necrons now held dominion over heaven torn asunder, and untold millennia would be required to heal a wounded and ravaged galaxy. Knowing the Eldari to be resurgent in their strength, their last remaining foe of note could capitalize on the beleaguered legions of the Necrons, following their revolt against the Star Gods. Yet the Eldar were of flesh and blood, and with time they would inevitably lose their grip on galactic dominion. For such is the fate of all species bereft of the eternal blessings of living metal. Transforming the Infinite Empire cities into great tomb world complexes filled with stasis crypts, the Silent King commanded his people to undertake a great sleep. Whilst the Eldari labored to rebuild the galaxy, the Necrons would slumber for eons until the opportune time for their reclamation of their empire was at hand. For flesh is ephemeral, and none can hope to outlive the Infinite Empire. As the tomb worlds of the Infinite Empire sealed their vaults, the Silent King destroyed the command protocols which for so long had been used to subjugate his empire. Failing his people utterly, the Silent King's legacy, though greater than any of his people in their history, had been stained with the surrender of their own souls. Embarking upon the void of unknown space within a planet-sized sepulchral engine, the Song of Oblivion, Sarek's pilgrimage of solace and penance lasted millennia as his people slept and the lesser species continued the cycle of supremacy and decay within a merciless galaxy. For 60 million years, the Silent King ventured past the bounds of the known universe, watching and waiting for the right moment to resurrect his empire and renew the dynasties to their past glories. Yet during 774.M41 of the human calendar, the Silent King returned to the galaxy. Encountering the Tyranids during his pilgrimage beyond the bounds of the galaxy, the Silent King recognized them as the single deadliest threat to his plans of his people's apotheosis. For should all life be scoured from the galaxy, Sarek's plans to return his people to forms of flesh and blood shall be ruined. Resolving to defeat the Tyranids, to preserve the life of his besieged galaxy, with the advisements of his new Triarch Council of Hapfrata, the Radiant, and Mesophet, the Shadowed Hand, the Silent King returns to find the majority of his people still dormant. By the meddling of lesser species, several tomb worlds had fallen, and unforeseen threats, such as the humans, have wreaked havoc across the void. Immaterial entities now split the galaxy in twain, as warp-spawn phenomena spew forth with reckless abandon. Working in secret to reawaken the slumbering tomb worlds to face the Great Devourer, the Silent King spent years meticulously concealing his identity and influence by allowing his Triarch Praetorians and unwitting Necron nobles to achieve his goals. Attempting to manipulate the younger species to aid in his own schemes, legends tell of his interaction with the so-called Great Angel of the Humans, though little evidence pertains to this incident. Revealing himself to his people after accruing ample resources, Sarek bid his followers to return to the tomb world of Antrak, where his chosen Triarchs now joined into his Dais of Dominion, powered by the Shard of the failed Catan, Nyadrazatha, intervening personally during the Gehenna campaign of 995.M41 to face the Blood Angels Astartes in combat. They would be forced to ally with one another to face the arrival of the Tyranids. Allowing his vassal lord, Illuminor Seros, to capture humans for experimentation within the Pariah Nexus, the Silent King would personally intervene during the Pariah Crusade to allow for his subordinates' continued efforts in finding a means to transfer the Necron consciousness into living host bodies. Wielding his scepter of eternal glory, imbued with the power of the C'tan, known as the Burning One, Sarek fights to unite his people once more, to prevent the Tyranid menace from consuming all life in the galaxy. For it is the greatest fear of the Silent King, that the inferior races in their methods of facing the Great Devourer only hasten their consumption and dominion of the galaxy. And should the foul creatures succeed in ending all life within the void, the Necron shall inherit a barren and futile universe.
When the Silent King saw what had been done, he knew at last the true nature of the C'tan, and of the doom they had wrought in his name.
This has been a tale of the Infinite Empire, read by the Omniscient. My liege shall reign supreme as the rightful ruler of the stars. Mark my words, puny mortals, for your time shall come where the ashes of your corpse empire shall be found wanting. But rejoice, for your end shall be swift, and should you prostrate yourselves in service to the Silent King, he may be merciful, though you may find such a gift to be not to your liking.